Before we really get into the meat of the subject, I think it's important for us to give a little bit of a disclaimer, right? The first and foremost is we're not lawyers, we're not accountants, we're not financial professionals either. And so some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about will lead to questions that you may want to consult, different professionals. And so please go ahead and do that. We are individuals who are interested in personal finance, and so we've kind of put some of this material together. As Riaz speaks, you'll hear him and I have been talking about this for about 2 years, on and off, and it kind of culminated in this presentation. So happy to be here and share this with you. And so we've given a lot of thought to this subject material. We've come up with a lot of ideas that we're looking forward to sharing with you. However, everything will be dependent on your own situation. So, take whatever we're presenting here, use it as appropriate, and inshallah it'll be of benefit.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. It's nice to be here. So just starting with some introductions. I'm Riaz Dharamshi, for those that might not know me. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Missing Wealth. We focus on estate assets and liabilities, so really kind of professional due diligence, so confirming bank accounts, life insurance policies, things like that after people pass away. And so some of the things that I'll be speaking about will be kind of gleaning from my experiences there. Alhamdulillah, we've been able to uncover more than $100 million in assets on behalf of our clients, and excited to have a discussion with you today and get your feedback.
Thank you. And I'm Nabil. Hopefully some of you know me, but although Riaz is in more of a personal finance, at least in vaguely in the similar area, I'm not. I'm an engineer, and that's what I do by day. But I do have a lot of interests in personal finance, as well as some of the other stuff that some of you have spoken to me about over the years. And so I'm this is one of the areas I'm interested in. I know I've had a lot of discussions with different people about different aspects of personal finance and credit cards and whatnot. And so this is one aspect like that I think is valuable, inshallah, that we'll share this evening. So the first thing is important to understand what we're not going to be talking about today, right? Because what we are talking about is very specific, and I just want to make it clear what the subject today is not, right? So first of all, this is not a discussion. I know we're talking about preparing for death, although we threw the word logistically in there on purpose. This is not about preparing for death from a physical perspective. We're not going to be talking about funeral or burial process. Alhamdulillah, our mosques do a very good job of managing this and being available for us when we get to that point. We're also not talking about preparing spiritually for death. I'll leave that to Sheikh Jafar, and he does a great job on that. We're not talking about Islamic wills either. I know some of you might think that, yes, preparing logistically, a big chunk of that is will, and it's true. But as you'll see as we go through the presentation, as Riaz explains certain things, and I explain certain things, you'll see there's a lot of other stuff around the will that we may not have considered in detail. And for the will, by the way, Maulana Rizvi has done a lot of work on that. You may have seen his book. If you go to the URL that's mentioned on that point, there's a lot of resources there. And then finally, we're not talking necessarily about the logistics after the loved one dies either, right? However, that being said, everything we're going to talk about today, ideally, will get you to a point where when that happens, God forbid, when your loved one does pass away, you have all the information ready, inshallah, if you kind of follow some of the things we're talking about. And so it'll make that process easier, inshallah. We're not going to talk about the actual steps, but how to prepare for some of those steps.
So thank you, Brother Nabil. So it gets into what we will be talking about today. Brother Nabil talked about the things that we won't be touching upon, but to get into what we will be talking about today, we'll be talking about specifically financial assets and liabilities. Can everyone hear me okay? The sound's okay? Yeah. Financial assets and liabilities, including online digital assets. We'll be touching upon death wishes as well, and there's some interesting kind of anecdotes that we'll share from personal stories, and how do you kind of think about certain death wishes that might be in your mind, but you may not have verbalized or spoken to someone. As a small example, where would you like to be buried? We have like Senlak, and we have Wadi Salam, and there may be other kind of cemeteries, and alhamdulillah, we're blessed with so many options. As a small example, maybe you have some preference, you have a certain family member that may be buried in one of those cemeteries, and you would like to be buried with them or close to them, as an example. And then finally, we want to give you some takeaways. This topic can be kind of overwhelming. We don't want to present all this material to you and making you feel very overwhelmed, and where do you start, and what do you do with this information? So we wanted to make sure that we have practical takeaways and practical steps that you can take to help prepare.
Okay, so a big part of preparing logistically for death is to work on documenting some of your assets and liabilities. I know the text is a bit small on the screen, but bear with me, I'll be going through most of it anyway, so it should be okay. The first question is, why would you do this, right? Why would you want to sit and document your assets and liabilities? What are the advantages? So in some families, I'm sure, some of you may have either experienced this or come across this, that, one person happens to take the lead, one member of the family, one of the two spouses takes the lead or has more knowledge of the finances. So by sitting down and documenting it, what you're doing is you're making this information available for the other spouse as well as your other family members, if you're an older family with adult children, for example. What happens typically upon death is the survivors struggle to locate some of this information, right? Some of the stuff is obvious. Maybe they know where the main bank account is, but where's everything else? What about this other safety deposit box that everyone forgot about? What about the insurance policy that you weren't aware of, et cetera, et cetera? And so locating the details of these various assets and liabilities can become difficult, especially considering it's a time of distraught, right? People are a time of distress rather. People are distraught and they're as it is not able to think 100%, and now you give them this difficult task of locating all the assets and liabilities. Furthermore, as I'm sure many of us can relate, our financial situations have become more and more complex over the years, right? If we rewind to our grandparents and our great-grandparents' generations, it was a lot simpler. They might have had one bank account, if they had a bank account at all, right? They might have just stored all their valuables inside the home, their jewelry under some mat or something like that, right? So it was a lot simpler in a way. Nowadays, our situations are a lot more complex. In addition to why, the question then comes about is what? What are we worried about documenting, right? You want to worry about documenting all the financial assets, other types of assets that might not be financial, liabilities, debt, etc., as well as insurances, especially life insurances and other kinds of insurances that may pay out at a time of death. And the other thing you may want to document is not just where is everything, but what would be my suggestion? So hypothetically, if I was the spouse in my family that handles more of the finances, I might perhaps document, this is the best thing to do with this account, this is the best thing to do with this other account, right? So some of that stuff that if you're the spouse who's managing the finances, to you it might be second nature, but being able to sit down and write all that down will be very valuable to your surviving spouse. And then finally, what else? What else is the benefit here, right? By going through this process, you kind of start thinking about all these things. Are all my accounts set up joint? Or if not joint, are they set up in the right way for my surviving spouse to be the beneficiary or the successor holder, for example? Or if it comes to insurance policies, well, have I double checked that all the beneficiaries are set up correctly, right? Maybe I got this insurance policy when I wasn't married and my parents are my beneficiaries who may already have passed away, and I haven't updated that ever since I got married to name my spouse, for example, right? So all these kinds of things can be a positive side effect of sitting down and working on documenting all of these various things. And like Riaz said, we're going to give you some concrete takeaways. We're not just going to throw all this information into your head and then expect you just to retain it all. We're going to give you some, let's call it a worksheet, homework. We're going to give you some homework to do to, inshallah, work through some of this.
So the next part here is about online and digital assets. Everything is becoming more digitized with technology. Before it used to be that you would get, bank statements in the mail, or you'd have everything kind of well documented and get, monthly statement. Now, more and more things are becoming online. And we have some examples here, but maybe I'll take an opportunity to make it a little bit interactive. This will be for the iPhone users. So how many people have an iPhone? A lot of people have an iPhone, so apologies if you don't have an iPhone. So if you can bear with me, if you go in your iPhone, open up your iPhone, and if you go in your settings and you look at, you click on your name, and then you click on sign in and security, and you'll see there's a couple of areas that are really important. There's one that is called recovery contacts, and another one specific to this presentation, which is called legacy contact. And if you read, I'm just reading the description of it, it says a legacy contact is someone you trust to have access to the data in your account after your death. So imagine all your phone numbers, your photos in your phone, anything else that you may be storing in your phone. I would encourage everyone, it will just take a few seconds now. If you click on legacy contact, you can set that up. You can put your spouse, your kids, whoever you'd like. And I'll speak a little bit about kind of what the equivalent is kind of in the Google ecosystem. And Brother Nabil has an Android device, so you can come approach him after as well. But basically, if we look at the first section here, it's related to legacy contacts. It's kind of what is called in the iOS or Apple ecosystem an inactive account manager within Google. But basically, you're designated a trusted person who can access the data on your phone. So things of photos, notes, personal information, contacts after you pass away. And both Apple and Google have a way for you to do that. These phones are purposely made very secure. And so, recently there was, maybe a number of years ago now, there was a criminal incident in the US, and they wanted to unlock someone's phone to see, some evidence, and Apple declined to give access to the FBI in that case, right? And so, if you, don't have a way to get that information, and that information was not properly set up while the person was alive, you may never be able to get access to that information again. And it could be, things that may not have a financial value, like, family photos and things like that. And so that's something that's very easy to do, and I would encourage everyone to do that if you haven't already. The next area is around passwords. And so you guys can think about all the different passwords and the apps and the websites that we all have to manage. And then we have different kind of password managers that may help us with that. We have 1Password, LastPass, Google Password Manager. You may want to put it in a spreadsheet. But ensure that whatever you're using, that a trusted person has access to it. They know what your system is. And without this, it would be very difficult for people to know how to log in to your accounts. Could be bank accounts, could be other types of accounts. And thinking about kind of cloud storage and others. Something here to think about that there might not be a good answer to is now there's a lot of proliferation of MFA or 2FA, which is multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, where you get text messages or you use some sort of app to authenticate and double authenticate your identity in case your password is breached, or some are using biometric scans and things like that. That is, even if you have someone's password and you don't have the other kind of two-factor part of that authentication, it may not work, but setting up kind of trusted contacts or backup contacts will be important. Also, making sure that a lot of times the phone is used as another authentication mechanism. So make sure that you have access to that phone. So in the note that we're going to be going through, you write the password to the phone, as well as making sure that you don't, if you have a loved one that passes away, don't rush to cancel that phone, because that phone may be useful in terms of authenticating and logging into different accounts, especially the phone number that they may have used. For cloud storage, you should clarify who should have access to your storage, so things like Google Photos, iCloud, Amazon Photos, Dropbox, etc. These often can contain family photos, memories, documents, personal records that might be needed for estate settlement, so make sure that you have told your family members what system you're using, how to get access to it. And then finally, if you think about social media, email, rewards, you may have something, maybe you want your social media accounts to be closed or archived, or create a memorial, memorialized somehow. And so platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Gmail, they have different kind of policies and ways to do that. But this is just kind of emphasizing planning ahead, thinking about these things. And of course, I can't forget rewards. People like Brother Nabil have lots of rewards points. And so, there's a lot of, nuances. Some can be transferred, some can be monetized in different ways. But just kind of thinking about that, documenting that, being proactive about that while you're still alive will only, help your, will only help your family when you're not there.
And if I can just add one thing, I think the most important you have to keep in mind is like Riaz was talking about the phone, like be particular, like make sure your spouse knows how to get into your phone. I know some people are like, no, my spouse shouldn't touch my phone, shouldn't look at what's on my phone, but you know, there's so much stuff we have on our phones these days, whether it's apps or information, or your spouse needs to know how to get into your phone. Okay, whether it's adding their thumbprint as a secondary or fingerprint as a secondary, but usually that's not enough. The PIN is necessary. And the second thing is email. Email is really important because even if you haven't properly stored your password to this website, but they have access to your email, they can probably reset it, right? So making sure they have access to your email and your phone is really important. Just to piggyback off what he said. Okay, one of the other aspects of kind of this preparing logistically for death, Riaz alluded to it earlier in the beginning of the presentation, it's the concept of a death wish, right? So some of us have specific death wishes, and I'd like to make a distinction here between what you put into your will, which is legally binding, versus what you may put in a death wish, which is more like asking your family to please do this if they can, right? So if you want, your valuable asset to be given to a specific person at the event of your death, please put that in your will. That's not a death wish, right? A death wish is something a little more general. For example, and by the way, when it comes to a death wish, it may make sense to not just share that death wish with your immediate family, but also with a more, somebody a bit farther away in terms of relation, or perhaps a trusted friend. Because what's going to happen if you pass away and your family is distraught, they're not going to have the presence of mind to go look up your death wish at that point. It may occur to them 2 days after you're buried, and then it's too late. Okay, so you may want to share this with a couple of close friends, family, might be a little bit distant perhaps, something of that nature, just so that they have the presence of mind to find this information at the time of your death, and perhaps bring it to the attention of your immediate family members so that it can be actioned. Some of the typical death wishes we've come up as ideas are, what to do if you pass away locally. So if you live in the Toronto area and you pass away locally, what do you want to happen? Do you want to be buried at Al Hussein Foundation or Meadowvale perhaps, or perhaps at York Cemetery, also known as Senlac, right? So that might be one thing you may want to consider. Would you want your funeral to be delayed for any reason, or would you prefer it not be delayed for any reason, right? Again, these are wishes. So if there's extenuating circumstances that your family cannot come through with them, they'll try, like I said, right? But that's how you should think about this. Similarly, if you were to pass away abroad, what would you want done? If you're traveling in another country, you're visiting Switzerland and you pass away, do you want to be buried there? Or do you want your body to be brought back? Now keep in mind there's some fiqhi rules around this that we didn't talk about last time we presented this, right? About is it okay to transport your body, all that, please, I'll leave it to the scholars. But just in terms of, what are at least your wishes in that scenario, okay? And then immediate wishes, like for example, if you have a coffin that you want to be buried in, that you perhaps had purchased on one of your trips, maybe your family doesn't know where it is, write it down, put it in a death wish, okay? I've had scenarios I've come across where people passed away, everybody in the community knows because they get the email, but their non-Muslim friends, they passed away on a Saturday morning, they were buried by Saturday evening, their non-Muslims find out on Monday when they show up at work. Right? Maybe if you're really close to some non-Muslim friends or co-workers or whatever, maybe you want them to know. In which case, that could be one of your death wishes. Call my boss and tell them I passed away, so they can inform, your colleagues or your friends, or especially if you're involved with certain organizations outside of work, maybe some charities or things like that. Maybe you do want to inform people that perhaps you spend a lot of time of your week with. Okay, so those are some of the ideas of what can go in your death wishes. This is just a non-exhaustive list. You could put really anything here that you feel is important to you. What I personally find is as soon as someone else passes away, I start to think about, I wish when I pass away, if they had done this differently. Well, put that in your death wish. Like honestly, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, and just before we get into this slide, just to kind of amplify something that Brother Nabil said, is the kind of non-binding nature. So you want to be very careful about what, and of course consult a lawyer, but the kind of things that you put in your will are kind of become legally binding versus a kind of companion to the will or a kind of non-binding note, if you will, right? Of course, your family will do their best to honor your wishes when you pass away, but you don't want to overburden them, right? Because if it says this certain thing in the will, and for whatever reason they cannot accommodate that, you don't want them to get into other, legal consequences or other issues that they may have to deal with, right? And so that's why I just wanted to emphasize that, these things are going to be not part of the will, and that's intentional. These are kind of non-binding instructions, if you will, that the executor or the family will try their best to do. So some of the benefits of working on a death note and the kind of what Brother Nabil has called it as a death note, and we're going to be showing you a template of that, and kind of covering everything that we talked about or we're talking about today. But the benefits of doing this and the benefits of being proactive about this are kind of really some of the key areas that we thought about. One is around simplifying the estate. I found personally that when I actually sat down and wrote down all of my credit cards and bank accounts and other kind of things that I had, I realized I had a lot of things, and I can probably simplify some of those things. As an example, when I was preparing for this, I realized that I had 2 RESP accounts and one that I had forgotten about. And they should really be kind of combined into one, because the other one may have easily been forgotten about. But really kind of writing it down while you're still alive will, by seeing it on paper, will help you understand areas that there may be complexity and areas that you may be able to simplify and consolidate, before you pass away. The next area is around optimizing the estate. So again, there's lots of professionals that can help with this from a tax perspective, from an estate perspective, from a, maximizing your government benefits and your pensions and minimizing your taxes, etc. And so planning for this, we're all going to die at some point, and just being more proactive in planning for it is going to really help you find those areas of optimization. The next area is around lifetime giving, and there's some concepts like die with zero or give charity while you're alive, and you may find that you have enough and you're able to give more of that to charity. You may have opportunities to do that while you're still alive, instead of course you want to leave some in your, when you pass away, maybe you want to give some to charity, but you may realize by going through this process that you have the capacity to give more even while you're alive, and you wanted to support a certain charity, and there may be bigger opportunities to do that, and not something that you have to wait till you die for it to happen. And then finally, around kind of just reflection and kind of the spiritual potential aspects of it, around kind of this dunya is temporary, and we're going to be going to the next world, and just kind of instead of shying away from it, addressing it head on, kind of being frank about it and understanding it, and just planning for it, and thinking of this as a journey, and planning for the next stage of that journey, and putting things into perspective. So these are some of the things that I found is helpful in terms of some benefits around why this might be helpful for people to think through.
Awesome. So now we get into the practical stuff. So we've talked a lot about why, what, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But let's try and make it a bit more practical. So if everybody could pull out their smartphones, scan the QR code that's on the screen. If you can't figure that out, you can type the URL. I know it's a bit of a long URL, but this is going to open a Google Doc. And for now, just follow along. Later, what you might want to do as homework, and please don't just do it individually. You do it, your spouse does it, you share notes after the fact, you look at it collaboratively together, you review it every so often, and all this stuff is mentioned in the document, by the way. So I'm just going to give you another couple of seconds to scan the QR code, and then I'm going to open the same document on the screen and walk through it. So this is kind of, like I said, our practical takeaway today. Everyone mostly got it open? All right, I'll give you guys another 5 seconds, and then I'll open it up on the screen here. Okay. what was it, template?
Template and death note.
So in case you couldn't scan the QR code, it's bit.ly/template death note. Oh, I can't seem to type. Okay, so as I'm waiting for the last few people to scan the code, let me give you a quick intro of what we're looking at. So this is a death note document. The concept of death note is not something novel. It's been spoken about online a lot. What we've done is we've taken the death note concept and made it more relevant to people of our faith, right? So there is some stuff here that's specific to religion, but frankly, 80% of it is not. So 80% of this would be relevant to anybody, regardless of whether they're Muslim or Shia, okay? But there is some sections that would be more relevant. So hopefully everyone's got it scanned. Let's switch to the actual death note. So the first thing you'll notice about the death note is we've kind of got that whole concept here, saying that this does not replace a will. As we had mentioned, it's intended to be a supplementary document. It should be reviewed and updated regularly. So for example, you may want to sit down once a year and work on updating this document. I would strongly recommend in cases where where you're married, that you go over this with your spouse. If you're not married or you have adult children, whatever, maybe go over with your children, whatever it might be. But this is something that you want to be updating regularly, for example, once a year, if not more often. And immediately after updating, what we want to do is sit and review it with your spouse and your adult children, or your children if they're maybe teenagers, older teenagers, whatever it might be. Okay, and you'll notice right away in the personal information section, there's a date last updated and a section for date reviewed with my spouse or heirs. Okay, so it's very important that this is not a surprise, that this document is looked at for the first time by your survivors after you die. Because it's not going to be as useful for two reasons. A, they're going to be like, I don't understand what he's written here or what she's written because of the way you've written it. Or you start to realize that, hey, you didn't mention this thing that would have been valuable. Because if you show it to your survivors now, they'll be like, can you add this? Can you add that? Can you make this more clear? Okay, so there's a lot of value in doing this ahead of time.
So just to add here, for those of you that are following along, one of the things that you can do is if you do file, make a copy, it will kind of create a copy in your own. This is not an editable file, in case anyone's trying to edit it. It's meant to be as a reference, but you can make your own file and then start making changes to it. You can also print it and fill it out, by pen. But just wanted to share that so that you have a way to.
Wishes section may be something you share. Some of the financial information you may want to document. First of all, life insurance. Life insurance is very important. Okay, I've heard of situations where someone passes away and they don't know where the life insurance document is. I know there's a couple of insurance agents in the community. Maybe they can relate. Who's the policy held by? Who do we contact? What's the policy number? Is the policy paid up? Et cetera, et cetera. Keep in mind that it's not just the regular policies you're interested in. Sometimes people have insurance policies through work that gives them 1-time salary, 2-time salary. That's additional life insurance that you need to be aware of claiming. Okay. Sometimes you have other liabilities, other insurances as well that might be tied to specific liabilities. Okay, we recommend that those types of insurances be documented along with the liability, which comes in a later section. But anyway, just document all the insurances you have that might be relevant to your survivors when you pass away. The biggest section generally will be financial assets. Okay, again, this is not our grandparents or great-grandparents' generation when they had 1 or 2 accounts and that was it, right? A typical person today probably has 5, 6, 7 accounts between group RSPs and TFSAs, and sometimes they're in one institution, sometimes they're in multiple institutions, right? That's the kind of stuff you want to document here. You want to document where they're held, approximate balances as of the date of writing, ownership information. This is account held in my name, or this is joint with us, or whatever. And then finally, the beneficiary successor information. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the perfect time to review that beneficiary successor information. Make sure your RSPs have your spouse listed as a beneficiary, which is great for tax purposes. Make sure your spouse is listed as successor holder on your TFSAs, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? There are other things though, other than typical financial assets, right? Some people don't think of your workplace pension, right? Sometimes you have workplace stock plans, right? If your company gives you stock units on a yearly basis, which vest a certain way, you might get them accelerated if you pass away, like you're obviously your survivors. And so that stuff is important to document where it is, what's the account number, right? Where is it held? If you have any significant amounts you may have loaned to other people, so maybe you did a loan in your lifetime, sometimes your spouse might not even know about the loan because you're helping somebody out, for example. If you'd like that amount to be collected after you pass away, if you're happy forgiving it, then it's fine. But if it's something you want, it's an important amount and a significant amount, this is another place where you could document things like that as well, because that's an asset, right? It's an amount you've loaned out, so it's an asset to you. And then finally, it's interesting or important to not only document where everything is, but what do you want your survivors to do? So like, for example, if your RRSP is held at a certain institution and you manage it and you're happy with how it is, but you feel like this is not the right place to be managing after my spouse passes away. Maybe it's too complicated, maybe it's better to go to a simpler system, whatever it might be. Those kinds of comments, instructions, advice would be great to put in here. And I'm sure your spouse would appreciate that after your death. There's also, now, this is an interesting thing because, again, this is not our great-grandparents' generation, right? We're talking about crypto. We're talking about, other real estate. Some people here might be not just owning their own primary residence, but have 2 rental properties. Some people have Bitcoin. Some people have, Ethereum, whatever it might be. I guarantee you, if you're a technical person and you have Bitcoin, your spouse probably doesn't know where that is. They don't know where the wallet key is. They don't know who, what custody the wallet's held in. They have no idea, right? So document it, right? Beyond documenting, Riaz talked about passwords. Like, if you're documenting some of this and it's very, sensitive information, like for example, the blockchain key of your Bitcoin wallet, this private key of your Bitcoin wallet, maybe put it into a password manager, but at least make sure it's accessible to your spouse or your survivors. And again, this is where, when you go over this document after you've written it, once a year you go over the document, they'll be like, what's Bitcoin? What's crypto? These questions will all come up. And that's where you realize, like Riaz said earlier, that my situation is too complicated. Maybe I shouldn't worry about all this. Maybe I think I'm having fun on the side with Bitcoin, but I'm just making it complicated for my survivors, right? So some of these things are important discussions and hopefully one of the side benefits of having this document prepared, okay? And then liabilities, right? So some of the liabilities are obvious: mortgages, loans, auto loans, but sometimes you might have other liabilities. Maybe you borrowed money from somebody in the community because you need to make rent one month. You didn't tell your spouse about it. Write it down, okay? Make all those important things written down. If there are any associated insurances with these liabilities, this is a good place to put them. And then finally, similar to financial assets, if there's documentation on what your survivors should do, like for example, if the mortgage is joint and you want to tell your spouse, go to the bank, tell them I'm dead, and they'll take my name off the house and the mortgage, great, that's good instructions. Okay, but put those kinds of instructions, especially if you are, like I said, the person in the family who handles the finances. You know all this stuff off the top of your head, and you think everybody else does. Everybody else doesn't. Okay, so it's important. And then, any other stuff you may want to mention. Hey, all our bills come out of this account. This is the credit cards we need to pay every month. This is our mortgage amount. This is our, that kind of thing. Any day-to-day. This section is important because keep in mind, when you pass away, it might take months and months for all the other stuff to settle down. But the mortgage payment, the car payment needs to go out next week, right? So the day-to-day banking, that's why we pulled it out of a separate section. This is the stuff that you want them to know ASAP. So hopefully they scroll down to this part right away and then work on everything else later. Okay, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, so this next section is about the Islamic obligations. And again, some of the things that we don't necessarily kind of talk about, but some of the practical kind of implications. And so starting with kind of this one is really around particular items that you may want to give to other people. I think another way to use this section and another way to think about, just some of the practical aspects in general, because I often get asked, like, Islamically, from a Sharia perspective, there's X percentage here, X percentage there, and how do you practically do that? You're living in a house and you're going to give 11.11% to your parents, and how do you do all that? One way to do that is, if you have people that are entitled to a certain asset, you can ask them if they need that, or they're relying on that. Perhaps they're not, and they're waive their right. And if they waive their right, then you don't need to kind of account for that. Other people I've seen have done kind of specific life insurance policies in their, as their parents as the beneficiary, as an example, or other ways to do that to help kind of with some of the kind of practical implications of truing up the Islamic obligations and what you may be putting in your kind of legal will. Other areas to consider are khums. So if somebody's now, imagine you've passed away, someone's administering your will, they might not know what your khums situation is. Are you up to date? Do they now need to go back and pay it on your whole estate? Do they just need to do it in the last year? Leaving out the guesswork, right? Documenting what you might already have in your mind, but for people to figure it out after you pass away will be very difficult. And then along those lines, we also have things like qada fast, qada namaz. We hear about when people pass away, they may have, the eldest child or maybe abroad or something. They should arrange for some qada namaz or fast, but how do they know what that should be? Maybe there's some amount as a precaution, but if maybe when you were a teenager you missed some fast or whatever, only you may know that, or what you would like to kind of put there. So kind of try to make that, it will also force you to think about it and remember. And hopefully, reflecting on this, maybe you're able to pay back the qada while you're still alive. But again, maybe you want some as a precaution. Maybe you were sick one day, or who knows, right? So just kind of listing that out. Go ahead.
We're gonna try and wrap up in the next 5 minutes, so we have time for questions. But go ahead.
Yeah. So these just I'll breeze through this last areas. Is just kind of touching again on the online digital assets. So what were your email accounts and passwords? Your smartphone, so the phone password. That's, I've heard, is very, very important to get. If you want to get the contact information for a coworker or a manager or things like that, you'd want to be able to get access to the phone very quickly. Social media accounts, listing those accounts and what you want to be done with those. And that kind of summarizes.
Yeah, and by the way, one of the things about passwords, we talked about legacy contact on your Apple account, and there is a similar inactive account manager concept on Google. But sometimes it's hard to just depend on those services, right? So it is important for your passwords to be available. And by the way, if you are using one of these password managers, a lot of them have features to allow your passwords to be passed on to your surviving spouse. Like LastPass, for example, has something called, I think it's called Legacy Contact. And so you have a button that your legacy contact can click saying, this person is, dead or incapacitated, give me all their passwords, right? And then you as the account holder have, 24 hours or 48 hours, it's configurable to say, no, I don't want my passwords to be given. But assuming you're passed away or you're incapacitated, within that 48-hour period, all your passwords would pass on to that legacy contact, right? So for example, myself, I have my wife listed as my legacy contact with, I think, a 48-hour delay, and then I have some other family members with a 7-day delay, right? So there is an ability for my wife or other people to get all my passwords if I was to pass away or I was in a coma or whatever it might be. Okay? So not only are you thinking about how to document this information, but also figuring out how to set this up appropriately so that it's accessible to your survivors. Okay? So like I said, this was the big part of the presentation, right? To give you homework. So the expectation is everyone's going to go home, sit down with your spouse and your children, start working, each parent, for example, or each adult in the household, start working on this document on your own, fill it all out, and then discuss it with the other members of your family. Make sure this document is updated and discussed on, at the very least, an annual basis, if not more often, if you'd like. But it needs to be something that's a document that's not too out of date, right? If it's a 5-year-old document, hasn't been looked at in 5 years, it's not going to be nearly as helpful in the scenario where you've passed away. Okay? And so that was the big thing.
Yeah, I mean, we tried to cover as much as we could in this time. There's a lot of other areas that we didn't talk about. Incapacity is a really big one. So you may, for example, God forbid, get into an injury or be incapacitated in some way, and we didn't really touch on that. There's guardianship and what happens to children. We didn't go deep into estate planning, tax planning, even topics like choosing an executor. So inshallah, in time, if there's interest, we have a feedback form at the end. If there's interest on some of these topics, we can see if we can bring some professionals to try to help present some of these topics as well.
Yeah, and the important reason we're putting this on there is to make you think about these things as well, right? I mean, we're not experts in powers of attorney and all these things, but you need to be worried about this. You need to be worried about if I'm in a coma tomorrow, who's going to make the medical decisions for me? Are they going to have a problem making medical decisions for me? Wouldn't it be easier if they had a medical power of attorney, for example, right? Or if I was to become incapacitated and my survivors need to be able to, or not my survivors, but my other family members need to be able to open bank accounts and close bank accounts and do financial transactions, that's where a power of attorney would have been valuable, right? But again, at that point, it might be too late. So again, we're not experts in powers of attorney, but we thought we'd throw these points on here so that, as you're looking at this presentation at home perhaps, and we'll share the link, by the way, to the presentation. As you're looking at this presentation later, you come across this slide after you've hopefully finished your homework, and you start to realize that these are other things I need to worry about now that I've got my death note put together. But worry about your death note first, because in my opinion, that is the most valuable piece of documentation. Of course, power of attorney is important, but the death note is going to be really valuable to your surviving family members. And that's pretty much the end of the presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions, comments. There is a couple of mics. I think there's one mic in the ladies and one mic in the gents. He has a question over there.
Oh, without sugar, no sugar. Yeah. And while we're taking the questions, this is the feedback form. We'd love your feedback. What we can do better for other presentations. So as we're taking questions, please do fill out the feedback form as well.
Assalamu alaikum. I have just one question about this cemetery. Can I now tell the Mukhi at the JCC that this is my preferred place for burial, or you have to do it after, your kids have to do it after?
Do you know, Ghazan Farbar? As the MIC Mukhi, do you know the answer to that question?
Thank you.
Oh, he was saying, can I elect to the ISIJ Mukhi where I want to be buried from now, or does my family have to state that after the fact? I'm not sure the answer to the question. Yeah, I don't think, because I think the way it works is they have allotment of burial spots, and at the time you pass away, perhaps, inshallah, you live so long that we run out of spots in one spot, and now there's only two available, for example. That would kind of limit that choice. So I don't think they let you pre-select, but knowing what I do, like at least at Meadowvale and Al Hussein Foundation, we have quite a few spots in terms of the ISIJ. Senlac, I think we have less, but I still think we have quite a few left. So I think, you can't pre-select, but I think the selection should be okay, like in terms of availability. Any other questions? I'll throw the QR code for the template again, just in case anybody missed it, and I'll go back to the feedback form later. Yeah, I'll jump around. Anyone have any questions that we can help answer? Or comments for that matter? If you have a certain situation that you think would be valuable to share with the larger group, we'd be happy to take those comments as well. Good, no questions.
No questions, wow.
Excellent.
Covered everything.
So if there's no questions, I'm going to reiterate. This is everybody's homework, okay? In the next, let's say, 2 weeks, okay, you're going to start this document. You don't have to get it 100%, but you're going to at least start the document in the next 2 weeks, okay? Yes, do you have a question? Sorry, let me just finish my thought. The next 2 weeks, start this document, okay? Work on it through the time If you're done, share it with your family. If you're not done by Eid day, you're taking too long. Okay? Try and have it wrapped up by Eid day. When you meet the family, you sit down on Eid, you can even, maybe it's a bit of a morbid subject, but you can share it on Eid. Either way, spend some time in the next couple of months, maximum, to have this document done and shared with your family and reviewed with your family. Okay? Don't put it off. Because, the worst thing you want to happen is, you pass away in a year and your survivors are like, why didn't he sit and listen to the document that we sat through the presentation about, right? Because it would have made my life easier. So, and it doesn't have to be perfect, right? Make the document to the best of your abilities, and then you can perfect it later, right? There's a saying, what is it? Perfect is the biggest enemy of good. Or, no, what is it? Something like that? Yeah, perfection is the worst enemy of good, right? So you don't need to be perfect. Just be good enough so that it's documented. There's something there that'll help your family. Sorry, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
First of all, the presentation was excellent. Thank you, Riyaz Nabil, for putting this on. Great information. So 2 questions come to mind to me right now. Is the executor of the will, I don't know if maybe I missed it. It's part of the question or the worksheet that you have. And the second question was, so I have all this filled out and all the access, passwords, and they're the beneficiary. What happens, like, there's a dispute of who I've left it to? How binding is this document in a legal aspect?
Right. Yeah, good question. So first of all, about the executor. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about the executor, mostly because we didn't talk about writing an Islamic will, right? The Islamic will is a prerequisite, in my opinion, to this death note, right? So if you're sitting here today and you're worried about writing a death note and you haven't wrote a will yet, get the will done first, right? Your will is more important than a death note. Your death note is important too, but your will is more important. To Maqbool's point, the executor is something that would be distinct or would be documented in your will. That would decide who's the person who's going to be actually distributing your assets, etc. In terms of who would fulfill your death note, your death wishes, that's not as binding. So to your point, the death note is not binding. It's more to assist your family on how to manage things, right? Here's what I suggest you do with the RRSP account once I pass away. But if your wife's like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, I'm not going to follow that, that's cool, right? That's totally up to her, or up to him if it's the opposite direction. So the death note is not binding by any measure. It's intended to be totally a helper document, if that's, yeah.
And just to add, the will determine how things are distributed, and there can be litigation around that, and that's kind of a legal question. But the death note really tells you what it is. You might say, give X% to my spouse, X% to my kids, but what is it that you're actually talking? Like in your will, you're not going to have, my cell phone is with, Bell, and my internet is with Rogers, and you're not going to have that level of things in your will, right? Because every time you get a new cell phone plan, you don't want to have to pay a lawyer a few $1,000s to update your will, right? And so the will determine, just percentage allocations and where things go, and this death note will help assist kind of figuring out what that is.
And the inheritance section of the death note, it's important to understand that this does not replace your will. It says it right there. If you look at the actual section, it clearly says this section does not replace your will. What the purpose of this section is, Riaz alluded to this earlier, but what the purpose of the section is, typically, we have a lot of, especially for those of us, who have most stuff in registered accounts, and a lot of our wealth is in registered accounts and in our home. A lot of times there's not a lot in our estate from a legal point of view, right? If you were to pass away and your house is joint with your spouse, and your RSP, your spouse is the beneficiary, your TFSA, like I said, your spouse is a successor holder, then when you pass away, what's your estate? Your car, maybe, if it's in your name, right? So there's not a lot to your estate from a legal point of view. But from an Islamic point of view, that may be different. So this section is where you might want to put some of those wordings in. Again, you can't legally bind your spouse to give a certain part of something that's held joint, because when you die, it becomes theirs. But you can ask for them to give this much to your daughter and this much to your son and whatever it might be. So that's that was the purpose of this section, by the way, in the death note, was to provide some supplementary inheritance instructions. But again, they're not legally binding, right? So this is a question that might be a better question for somebody who's running a will seminar, is to say, if the RRSP rolls over to my spouse, but from an Islamic point of view, it's part of my estate, how does it get distributed? And so you can put some verbiage in here, and hopefully your spouse fulfills that, is what this section was about. Yeah, please.
So I presume that you're giving personal consultation available privately?
I think Riaz might, but not me.
No.
No?
I mean, I'll be here to the thing, but
No,
we
let's
don't.
say if I need some help, allocating, like, have questions or whatever.
Yeah, if it's
like-
if it's questions about death note in general,
No, but
absolutely, I'd be happy to help.
I think
with
you mentioned that you're owner of a business or something like that. So to pay a service for it, is that possible?
Yeah, so we don't focus on this specifically. We work mainly with, we provide support to law firms and trust companies and accountants and things like that, so that they can better serve their clients. But happy to help as we can. But our focus isn't on working with consumers directly.
Assalamu alaikum. Just a recommendation for future presentations. I had actually attended this presentation on the internet rather than in person last time, but I attended again in case I'd missed something, and indeed I picked up more points today. So very good presentations both time, last time and this time. When I attended at home and I was watching on my TV monitor, I was able to read all the print that you had, and I was able to follow more in depth. Whereas here I found the print to be so small, and I'm near the TV monitor. Some of the audience is quite far away. So just a positive feedback for next time, maybe have less material per screen, and so the people in the back can follow it. Thank you.
Inshallah, we'll do. Thank you. Yeah, what Maqbool's been doing, which he's going to give you the idea, he's been following along on YouTube so he can read the presentation. Very smart. Perfect. Anyway, Riaz and I are here for another 5-10 minutes. If anybody has any specific questions they want to ask. But like I said, you all have your homework. Maybe I'll ask. I'll kind of remember who's here, and I'll ask you in 2 weeks whether you've gotten started, inshallah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.